the Southampton Progressive Caucus. It's an alliance of grassroots activists and the Southampton Town Democratic Committee. I'm your moderator, Rebecca Dolber. Thank you. And with me today are the 5 candidates who will be on the ballot in June's Democratic primary. Please join me in welcoming Kate Browning, Elaine DiMasi, Vivian Viloria Fisher, Harry Gershon, and David Pechefsky. It's so nice to see you all again, so thank you for coming. So the questions that were prepared for today's debate were a collaborative effort between the Southampton Progressive Caucus members and have not been shown to our candidates. 2 minutes will be allotted for each candidate to answer the initial question. Some questions today have related follow-up questions. For those, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer. Candidates will receive a warning from our timekeepers, who are right here, when they have 30 seconds remaining for each question. It should also be noted that each candidate has been given 3 blue cards. After we have gone down the line and every candidate has answered the current question, they are then at liberty to challenge another's answer by using one of those cards. The card will allow a 30-second challenge, and then whomever is challenged will have 30 seconds to rebut. For all of you live tweeters and Facebook Live people, I've been asked to give you the Wi-Fi password. The username is it's Cat Cove, and the username is all lowercase, free user, and the password is free pass. In an effort to maximize debate time, we ask that everybody please hold applause, and we've also eliminated opening statements. And so if we're ready, we'll jump right in, okay? Vivian, you drew the lucky straw, so you'll get to go first. Okay. So the current administration is dismantling regulations and agencies that protect citizens. Admittedly, some Democrats have even voted for rolling back regulations in banking. What would you, as a congressperson, do to put a check on this wholesale destruction, and what agencies do you believe have been hurt the most?
Certainly. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Wait, there it is.
I believe it's on now. Certainly, our regulatory agencies that protect our environment are the most critical right now, because once you ruin the environment, once you damage our ecosystems, there are no do-overs. And so that's certainly where I would begin to look at all of the regulations. And by the way, there's been a myth, which I believe started back with Reagan, that government is the enemy and that government doesn't work for you. And so regulations are an extension of that myth. We have to understand that the problem with regulatory agencies are not the regulations, but rather the regulators, who often are understaffed, which is certainly happening under this administration. So we have to make sure that we staff our agencies so that they can expedite the regulatory procedures, and that we have scientists who are part of all of the agencies that regulate all of the delicate environmental protections that we need. And to say that regulatory agencies destroy business, right? They're business killers. Again, if you have a smooth running bureaucracy or agency, there is no reason why business and the regulatory agencies can't work toward the same goal, which is to provide the goods and services that are needed by the people in our country without harming the air they breathe, the water they drink, and the very future of our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Elaine, you're next.
You've asked us which agencies are the most crucial and what we're going to do about it in Congress. Although I have plenty to say about the environment, and it's certainly in our own headlines, one of the problems with that is that the effects of deregulating environmental protections, sometimes they're not immediate. But something that is immediate is when the Consumer Protection Bureau, consumer protection agencies, when those are harmed, as they have been under this administration. I would say that because the impact is immediate, I had a chance to sort of revisit the house hunting I did 3 years ago. I changed neighborhoods, and I did a lot of my search in different areas of Brookhaven town, as well as a little bit in Islip town. I looked at so many homes that were foreclosed on and obviously flipped, and each one of them just really hurt to tour through because I thought about the families whose dreams were shattered there. The Consumer Protection Bureau was really a 21st century, really forward-thinking. They made it possible for the first time to make sure every complaint, no matter how small your business or your family's financial concern, that it would be logged. They mapped out the hot spots. They made sure that they would know where to go to put that regulation and that protection in place. And that's what we have to do with all agencies. Agencies, they have much more dexterity than our laws. And that's why I'll work so hard to protect them in Congress, because they can change their rules faster than this big, lumpy, divided Congress can actually implement laws. And that's the comments I want to make about that.
So most of you know, I think, that I was in business for 25 years before I decided to run for office. And one of the things that I used to tell people all the time is that regulations were terrible. And the only thing worse than regulations is not having regulations. And right now we're seeing that right in front of our eyes with what the Trump administration is doing. And the obvious one, as Vivian said, is what's happening for the environment. And you can have 20 years of environmental progress taken away by canceling regulation and pollution standards. But it goes to other areas. If you look at some of the developments that have made our society better, look at the seatbelt or the airbag. All of that came about because of regulation of the auto industry. And if we didn't have that regulation, we wouldn't have seatbelts in cars. And imagine where life would be today without seatbelts and without airbags. So there's a lot more to the issue of regulations than what meets the eye here. And then we can talk about banking and everything that affects banking. In the aftermath of 2008, we passed Dodd-Frank. And Dodd-Frank really was geared to put a check on what banks do and to protect the consumer and the everyday person. Again, because capitalism unchecked is not good for anyone. So we need to stop the undoing of banking laws, starting with the Consumer Protection Agency, which is what Elaine brought up. Trump wants to undo that. Zeldin wants to undo that. And make the agency go away, or at least they put in an administrator now who's dedicated to destroying it. So we need to protect our agencies. And another example is the FAA. Imagine if we didn't have airplane regulation. We'd just be in a terrible state. So we have to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Kate?
Okay. Yes, as far as environment, banking, and I represented a district, the 3rd legislative district. There is a ridiculous amount of boarded up bank-owned homes, and they continue to sit year after year being boarded up, and nothing's being done. So we need to certainly look at the regulations on banking, but there's a couple of other things I'd like to talk about. The National Labour Relations Board has been gutted. That is a serious problem for workers in America. A lot of the issues is that when there's an unfair labour practice that goes on, the employee can file an unfair labour practice, and basically by gutting the NLRB, it's going to create a ridiculous long time to get a decision. And that's unfair to American workers who are doing a good job. OSHA, that's another place. And Lee Zeldin has supported gutting OSHA. He's supported gutting the NLRB. And when we look at OSHA, there's a 13% increase in deaths and injuries on the job since the Trump administration. So gutting OSHA is not good for American workers. The CDC and the ATF, those are 2 other organizations, agencies that are being gutted. And this is something that Lee Zeldin supports again too. Tying the hands of the ATF, especially because of these gun regulations we have, or lack of gun regulations. And we have this terrorist watch list where there's the no-fly. Well, Lee Zeldin is okay with that, to gut the ATF and tie their hands from being able to enforce what they need to do. The CDC, we're talking about gun regulation, we're talking about the need to look at the gun violence and explore that. That's something that we need to do to get a hold of why we have so much gun violence in this country. And to tie the hands of the CDC and to gut them, that's going to hurt Americans again. So I think that's what I have to say, and I'll pass on to you.
I've worked in public service all my life, and one of the things that most angers me about the Trump administration is the disrespect for experience. And I've worked with so many dedicated public servants that really have the public interest at heart. So this idea that you could go in and put people as heads of agencies with no experience and then gut the work that they've been working on for lives and dismiss their deep knowledge is unbelievable to me. Now that being said, it's true that some things are better handled through legislation, some things are better handled through regulation. And finding that right balance is part of the job of a member of Congress. So when you get into Congress, I'm going to look very carefully and are these things that we need a legislative fix for to make them permanent into law so we can't have them be changed at the whims of the administration? Or are these things that are better dealt with through the bureaucracy and through the regulatory process, and then it requires working with the people in those agencies to have effective policy. And my experience in government has always been that you can find unlikely allies if you're open-minded and you want to work with people. For example, the Giuliani administration, they hated the city council. I was a senior staffer, but you could find people in those agencies that did want to work with you to make good policy. And in terms of the specifics, I agree. National Labor Relations Board, this is part of the assault on labor. The EPA, of course, my brother-in-law works for the NRDC. His life's work is being unraveled. But I also think putting incompetent people at the heads of agencies is another form of gutting them. I know more about housing policy than Ben Carson. I am not qualified to be HUD secretary. I also deemed that I knew more about foreign policy than Tillerson. I've worked all over the world. I am not qualified to be Secretary of State. So we need to tackle it on both fronts, in terms of competence and in terms of the actual process of lawmaking and regulations.
Thank you, David. So we have one follow-up question to this topic. And again, I'm just going to ask everyone to please hold their applause to the very end of the debate. So a related question. There's been a general attack on the social safety net. How would you protect, support, and sustain social programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the ACA?
So do I start again?
You do start.
Okay.
Hang on, we got to do this. This collaborative effort.
We're all really good at it.
Well, I'm going to tell you, when my husband and I pulled up here this morning, my husband said, I recognize this place. We've been here before. And then we recalled that we had come here for a farewell party for hosts and children who had been here with the Fresh Air Fund. We had hosted a child from Bronx. And I was a Fresh Air child when I was 9 years old. I spent the summer with a family. And I thought, here I am, walking into a place where I'm running for Congress, and I have been here because I hosted a Fresh Air Fund child. And how did I get here? It was because I had opportunities. My mother was left a widow with 6 children, and she had to work very hard. She mostly worked 2 jobs. But it was also a big help for her to have had a widow's pension, the Social Security widow's pension. It really made a difference. It made a difference in my life to have the ability to go to a CUNY college, Hunter College, which was free at that time. So all of these safety nets are just that. They're safety nets. And they're opportunities for people who might be falling down to have the support that we provide as a country and as an empathetic community. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to run for Congress, because I saw that there was a lack of empathy in Lee Zeldin and Trump and their administration.
Thank you, Vivian. Elaine?
Our social safety net does benefit all of us because we all benefit when all the people around us haven't fallen off the rails of their lives and have somebody to help them back up. The unfortunate thing about the things the Trump administration says is they are very bald-faced about saying, if you're a good person and something bad happens, your neighbors will help you. If you're a bad person, well, you don't deserve to be helped. And so when we allow that social safety net to be eroded as a government program, we allow people to start to make those judgments about other people that causes all of the strife that we're seeing in our electorate right now. That's why it's so important that we get this right. In terms of getting a divided and difficult Congress to vote on things, evidence-based policy has a strong role to play. Anyone who is assigning a budget for a program wants to see that it is having an effect. They also want to see that they feel that they're assigning a fair share to it, so that when we go back to the data and we show that a wage has stagnated, or that pensions used to be available to a large number of people and now they're not, or that other social programs used to be available at a higher level or not, or that the Social Security dollar cap is in the wrong place for the wages that people make now, we have to use those numbers and show them why it's important and how to feel good about fixing it, just making it right again.
Thank you, Elaine. Perry?
Nobody runs against the social safety net. Going back to Ronald Reagan, everybody gives lip service to it. But the Republican Party has attacked it in various ways. The way Trump is doing it right now, or among the ways, is means testing. The idea of having means testing for Medicaid or work testing for Medicaid is an attack on the social safety net. The idea of bumping up the age for Social Security is a way of attacking the social safety net. And the way of cutting the amount of money that the government has available in total because of the tax cut, the irresponsible tax cut that just happened, is a way of targeting the social safety net. And we need to be aware of it, and we need to point out what Zeldin has done on it. And Zeldin in the House just passed a bill that directly takes on Social Security. And we need to make people aware of what they're doing, because they're not saying they're taking on Social Security. They're hiding behind responsibility and other euphemisms for taking on the social safety net. But that's what it's all about, and that's what we should be making this campaign about in the fall.
Thank you. Kate?
So I think what's going on, obviously Lee Zeldin is supporting again with Paul Ryan on gutting Social Security and attacking Social Security, and I think what the end goal is, their goal is to privatize it. And that's frightening for all of us. And I can tell you, having represented school bus drivers who are extremely dependent on their Social Security because the 501k or the 401k was just not enough for them. And so that is something that we need to be cautious of, and that they're very dependent on their Medicare. Also, our seniors are so dependent on their Medicare that we can't allow them to continue to gut the surplus. Another issue that's come up recently was the Farm Bill. And I can tell you, as a legislator representing a district where we had many recipients of SNAP coming in and having problems being recertified on their SNAP benefits. Now, this is something new that's just coming up, and we need to be aware of what might be happening. Now, temporary assistance recipients, they do work. They are working for their SNAP benefits, and as are many low-income families. But I think we need to be cautious, because I think what this administration is going to try to do is to reduce the amount of benefits, and that's going to increase people going to our food pantries.
My mother worked incredibly hard throughout her life. She worked 2 jobs, 61, she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, didn't have health care, didn't have a pension. Medicaid saved us. If we had not had Medicaid to provide for long-term care, we wouldn't have had money for my daughters to go to college. Our savings would have been blowing through. So absolutely, we need to protect our safety net. The numbers do matter. My team, the New York City Council, our job was to do the fiscal impact on legislation. So I know that that dollars and cents argument is important, but there's also has to be a moral argument about what is right, how we create a good society, and what are our principles and values. And we have to make that argument. We have to make that argument fearlessly in front of the Republicans. And if we're being honest about how we're going to pay for stuff, we also, as Democrats, we need to be much firmer on the need to cut the Pentagon spending. Because all the things that we say as Democrats that we want to fund, the money's not there because we let the Pentagon spending run away. They just voted in the Congress to increase it by $80 billion without questioning, without oversight. So we're going to have to be really firm on what we believe in. We can't just say we're for protecting Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicaid, which we are. We're going to have to also stand up and say how we're going to make that happen.
Thank you, David. Vivian has asked to use one of her cards, so when the timekeepers are ready, we will go ahead and let you start.
It's 30 seconds,
It's
correct?
30 seconds.
Yeah, I just have a.
Is this directed towards anybody?
Pardon?
Who is this directed towards?
Well, it's a general
Okay.
extension.
Great.
Because I feel that there are people who run on the end safety nets message. We saw that when Trump was saying that Obama had been the food stamp president, as if that were a bad word. Well, if anyone here has ever taken the food stamp challenge, I did for a week. And it's extraordinarily difficult to try to feed a family on what people get on food stamps. And oops,
Goes by quick, huh?
but that's what they were doing, and privatizing Social Security.
Thank you. So the final question in this subset, fortunately you have the mic, you're ready to go. The passing of the Republican tax bill is another means of destabilizing the security of the constituents in CD1. Assuming that you are a Congress...
Me or Elaine? I thought we were going down the line.
Well, that was, you used a card, so you got 30 seconds to...
Right.
Yes, so now we have just the last question in this subset of
Oh, this
questions.
is the still
This is
set.
Yes. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. The Republican tax bill. Assuming you're our congressperson after the election this fall, what steps would you support to mitigate the negative effects of the tax bill on our district? And you'll get a minute 30 to answer this question.
Step number one, move to repeal that bill because it's unjust, it's certainly deceptive, trying to get working people to believe that this bill was made to create jobs. Do you know that in the first quarter, those corporate entities that received these enormous tax breaks spent $325 billion on stock buybacks and on corporate benefits, on CEO benefits, and $100 billion on new jobs or raising the wages of the working people. You know, let's not allow people to divide us as working people and say that there are the blue-collar working people and the white-collar working people. If you get up in the morning and you have to go to work, unless you're a trust fund baby, most of us do, you're a working person, and you deserve to have the dignity of your work compensated. So I have to get back to what your original question was, and I lost track of it. But the point is that that tax plan, and people will see next April, people who are seeing a larger paycheck, there have been some erroneous calculations made in the at the IRS, and people are going to have to be paying their tax bill next April that they see as a great windfall during the year in their paycheck.
Thank
So,
you, Vivian.
thank you.
I think we need to show you how we can be convincing in Congress to repeal that tax bill or to amend the things that it did and effectively repeal pieces of it back. The first thing that we tell our colleagues is look at the results of the elections. People don't like what the Republican majority Congress enacted. Therefore, they elected a Democrat in New York 1. They elected Democrats in these special elections. They elected Democrats in these other districts. That's piece number one. Piece number two is You show people the unfairness of the motivations that new tax code gives for large corporations to send their business offshore. And it's not the part of the tax bill that's usually in the news, but if you dig in, there's quite a theft going on in terms of motivating companies to do more things overseas. And third, you invoke the unfairness of showing how wealthy owners of large corporations are being taxed at a 35% type rate, while their companies are being taxed at 20%, and you show that how that is going to motivate people to bring in funds for themselves through their corporations and hide them. And so there's a way to appeal to fairness that we have to hope will have a bipartisan appeal to a future Congress.
Thank you.
There are two major parts of the tax bill that were both unfair and will be unpopular over time. One of them is going to hit New Yorkers immediately, and that's the removal of the deduction or the cap on the deduction of state and property income, state income tax and property tax. Undoing that has got to be a priority, because that's where the Republican Party targeted the big blue states that provide services to their people. And we must, as a priority, undo it, and we must make this a campaign issue. And I think Zeldin is very vulnerable on it. Despite his vote, his party was a major sponsor of really a wealth shift from New York and California to the red states. It's war on New York, and we have to make sure that's the real campaign issue. The other part of the tax cut was the corporate bonanza. And we shifted money out of the government's general availability and gave it to corporations, presumably to invest in people, but in reality they invested in themselves. We need to undo it, but we have to be careful how we go about it, because if you simply undid that tax cut, you're going to tank the stock market, and that's going to be a shock to the system. You can't create a shock to the system. That's irresponsible. So we need to do it carefully and gradually. We need to do it. Don't make no mistake. We need to undo the Republican tax plan for what the corporate tax cut, but we need to do it intelligently. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry.
So, and I think first thing we need to do is take back the House. And the next thing we need to do is replace that tax bill. And I can tell you, again, having represented middle-income families in my district, in my 3rd legislative district, I can see more and more people will now be saying, I can't afford to pay my taxes, I'm going to have to move, or they'll walk away from their homes, and then we'll see more boarded-up homes. And that's a serious concern of mine. And the reality is why did we get SALT? It's because New York sends more money to Washington than it gets back. And this was an agreement that was made to allow us to have that SALT deduction. So certainly it's let's take back the House so we can repeal this.
The tax bill is a terrible piece of legislation in my view. It favors corporations and the wealthy at the expense of working people. So yes, we should call for repeal, but we also need to say what we stand for, and we're going to bite the bullet and say we're for a much more progressive tax scale where there's going to be tax increases on wealthy people, and we got to be honest about that and make that argument if that's what we believe in. Yes, it is an attack on New York in terms of losing the state and local and property tax exemptions. New York has been a net giver to the federal government. And this is only accelerating that, and again, so a lot of our tax dollars are going out of the state and going into to Pentagon spending that doesn't benefit anyone. But we also are going to have to be prepared in the event that we don't take back the House. What are the pieces of it that we're going to work on to improve? So, for example, the low-income housing tax credit has been gutted. That's a program I've worked. It's one of the many federal programs that I've worked on in my career. It's been gutted by the tax legislation. It's going to require working bipartisan to fix that. So we may be in a position where we're going to have to dig deep to sort of ameliorate some of the bad consequences of the tax bill.
Thank you, David. We're going to pass the microphone to Elaine for our next group of questions. Okay, these are about income inequality. Income inequality has worsened over the past decade. What are the biggest factors that have contributed to this? And what realistically do you think you can do as a congressperson to address these issues?
The biggest factors are the replacement of jobs that took people to do, but replacing them with machines and computers. And another big factor is our culture of ownership that states that the person who owns a company owns the labor and owns the lion's share of everything. And I wish that we would have a sea change of what we want work environments to look like. You know, I see a gig economy where people work very hard to get a little job here, job there, another job. They're almost defining jobs. We're almost creating exclusively jobs that don't have benefits and that don't have longevity and that make the worker pay for their own training. So what we want to see, and we can give it a boost with government programs, is to see companies get some incentives back to hire and train and to keep people for longer. I think that will have a large effect on the wages that people are paid and the fact that they'll feel that they have some expertise in the companies where they work. I think Long Island should update its trade schools for new jobs that we envision having and make sure that even more campuses from vocational schools are available inside the high schools. And I'm going to point out that the College for All Act, as it's defined, includes not only community college, but it also already includes vocational schools. And we should all start thinking of college and vocational school as pretty much the same thing, except for exactly what are you going to do with your hands and your mind when you take that class.
Thank you, Elaine.
Am I next?
Yes, you are, correct.
So, income inequality is a major problem in America today. And it's something that we had been fixing going through the 60s and 70s. American incomes were actually converging. And then something happened in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan. And the idea of trickle-down economics really finding its root in the government. Two policy things happened under Reagan. One is he began an assault on unions and the American worker. And two, we had an assault on the progressive income tax. Tax brackets for the most well-to-do in the country started coming down relative to other people's. We had a flatter tax code. And we had people advocating even for a flat tax, a single interest rate, a single rate that everyone pays. That assault on the income tax system and the progressive nature of the income tax system is what's the major driver to inequality in America. Now there's some specifics that Elaine talked about, automation and people losing their jobs. That's part of it too, and we do need to educate people, and we need to do it fairly. We need to educate people so they're not taking on masses of college debt. College debt, student debt, is a major problem that's going to really shackle our society going forward. It may be the housing crisis, the next housing crisis, the equivalent of what happened in 2008, if we don't tackle it. And we talk about education, we need education, but we need to make a way for people to get an education without becoming indentured servants to their lenders for their future going forward. So we need to tackle trickle down, we need to reinstitute a progressive tax code, we need to look out for labor, and we need to protect our students and make education more affordable. I think that's the real target. Thank you.
I can speak to having been a union rep again for school bus drivers. When it was traditionally a male job, they were paid much more. When women started coming in, the salary started to drop. So I think it's important that we make sure that we keep our unions strong. Because when you're in a union job, you are paid accordingly. I've worked in those non-union jobs, and you were threatened. You were told, find another job if you couldn't do something that they wanted you to do. And they had their favorites who would get more money than others. And so that's not fair. But what we need to do in the Suffolk County Legislature, we passed a bill for equality for all. And we have a Federal Equality Act, and we need to make sure that that's in place, that that gets approved, and that everyone, no matter who you are, is treated equally.
My view is that the rise in income inequality is really very much at the heart of what's going on, the mess that we're in, the strain on our economic political system. And if we don't address it with urgency, then things are only going to get worse. So there are many ways to tackle it through tax policy, through trade policy, through investments in job training, in education. All those things are things that we need to do. But I think that we also have to recognize that this is, this didn't grow out of nowhere. This has been, our politics have been captured by unscrupulous people that want to take the wealth of society and keep it for themselves at the expense of the rest of us. And we need to confront that with honesty and determination. And I also think that so there may be discrete things we can do, such as Medicare for all. So when I've been going door to door, the thing that comes up over and over again is healthcare and the lack of it and the cost of it. So that alone, if we have a universal healthcare system that lowers costs and provides decent care for everyone, would be a great step in addressing income inequality. But I think we also have reached a point where we may very well have to look at bigger ideas, such as a federal jobs guarantee program, and there are people in the Democratic Party that have been advancing that, or perhaps universal basic income. At some point we have to just say, the economy isn't working, we're in this global economy, and we may not be able to get to where we want to be through more traditional policy interventions.
Thank you. We'll pass that microphone to Vivian.
I liked being first better.
When you're last, everybody has taken your lines, but that's okay. Obviously, we need a standard national living wage. When I was in the legislature in the county, we established a living wage bill at that time. Some of it had to be adjusted for different industries, but we had a standard. So that's number one. We need that county nationwide. I agree that the union busting that Ronald Reagan really precipitated with the firing of the air traffic controllers certainly undermined unions, undermined what unions stand for, and that's in supporting and creating the middle class in the United States. The third thing is women's pay equity. And I want to expand on something that Kate mentioned as far as what happened with bus driver unions. I'm a teacher. I was a teacher for over 30 years. And teachers' wages started to go up when men were avoiding the Vietnam War and became teachers. And so the wages went up when more men became teachers. So it kind of works in both directions. That's basically, I feel like everybody has said what I already want. Oh, the gig economy that was mentioned by Elaine. That's one of the areas where it would be good to have Medicare for all, because there are people who go from one job to another without any benefits, without any safety net, who sometimes stay at a job because they can grab some health benefits. It enslaves them to a job because of the health benefits. And so if we had Medicare for all, we wouldn't have that kind of ball and chain on the working person.
Thank you, Vivian. So we have two follow-ups to this question, which you'll have a minute and 30 seconds to respond to. The first one is very straightforward. Elaine, can you give us an example of how income inequality has specifically affected our district?
One of the first things I did after moving to Long Island in 1996 was to look for something to do in the community, and it turned out to be a Habitat for Humanity work site, and it was in North Bellport. And I just remember the beautiful day and being up on the roof and sort of showing a deaf teenager how to hammer the shingles so that we could both work there together. And the new homeowner was confined to a wheelchair, but she was doing her part by sweeping the floor with a broom to get it out of the carpenter's way. And how, to me, it was a privilege to spend that Saturday like that. And for other people, it was a dire necessity to have people help them get them into a house. And looking back to 20 years later, from 20 years later, I feel like we have been stopped. So many of us have been stopped from feeling like we can do that handshake across the different things that we have to offer. And so I think on Long Island, we need to make absolutely sure that politics has not divided people so that they can't be the way they actually are in real life, which is to help that neighbor.
So let me give a few examples of where income inequality has a real effect in this district. And one is in the aftermath of the banking crisis and the number of people who had to give back their homes and had their homes foreclosed on. And we created empty houses and crime problems resulted from that, and people were left without a home and people were left without jobs. The decline in unionism had an effect here. There aren't as many good union jobs available in this district as there used to be. And there are a lot of causes for it. The manufacturing, Grumman leaving was a big driver. But all of that results in income inequality in this district because instead of having good union jobs driving the economy, we're having service sector jobs driving the economy. And the last one I want to cite, a real example that we can see of it, is there are people doing great in this district, out here in Southampton and East Hampton. There's people who have 2 homes, and I'm one of them, who really benefited from the economy. And we need to have, people like me need to have compassion for others and level the playing field. And my success really is supposed to lead to other people's success. People should all have the opportunity to do well, to have a good education, and to have a good life. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
Again, lack of union jobs, and one perfect place we can talk about is Walmart. Walmart is definitely one of those problematic places where many people are working and getting poorly paid and poorly treated. Housing is another issue. Suffolk County is one of the most segregated counties in the country. And the issue being is when you don't make enough money, you're limited to where you can buy a home. And so therefore, we have many communities. We have a lot of very low-income communities. We have a lot of the more middle-income communities where no one has a choice. You're limited to where you can live. And I can tell you, because when my husband and I, we first moved here, we didn't have a lot of money, and we needed to find somewhere to live, and we found something affordable in Shirley. And I can tell you, it's been a great experience because it's a very diverse district, and I'm glad that my kids have been able to go to a diverse school district. And you know, it opens their minds and it opens their eyes. So that's a big problem, is that we have too many very low income communities and people are forced to go to a lot of those communities because of lack of income. So I think that that's something that we need to look at, is creating more diversity here in Suffolk.
The question was about the impacts in the district on inequality. So I think two are clear. One is that I'm from Patchogue originally. In Brookhaven, Brookhaven is losing population, and except for Patchogue. Patchogue is the only place that's gaining population, and that's as a result of income inequality. People literally can't afford to live in Brookhaven because of the high cost of housing, because of low wages, because of healthcare issues. So that has a devastating impact, that it's unaffordable even for people making quite good incomes. I think we all know this. You could be making over $100,000 and still be struggling in much of the district. So that's one impact. The other one that I would point to, I mean, there are many, of course, but the opioid epidemic, I view that as also related to income inequality, that people are struggling and suffering and desperate, and that drug addiction ultimately, yes, you can suffer from drug addiction if you're a wealthy person as well, but that particular crisis is related to economic inequality. It's a complex topic. I'm actually having a town hall on Tuesday night with Lieutenant Governor candidate Jimani Williams, who's been a champion on this issue, and I invite all of you to go to my website this coming Tuesday in Patchogue, and we can talk more about this topic.
Thank you, David. I'll pass it down to Vivian.
I turned it off again, Vivian. Sorry. But I don't want to silence you. I want you to speak.
I'm wearing a button that someone who lives in East Hampton gave me. It says YIMBY, yes in my backyard. There are so many areas across CG1 where we could have built some more affordable housing, and we have not. I was on the Workforce Housing Commission, and we worked very closely with Paul Pontieri as he was developing what was a rundown downtown into a viable, exciting, thriving downtown with affordable housing. So it can be done, but you have to have the courage, you have to have the political will, and you have to have the drive that somebody like Paul Pontieri has. And he combined the arts with that. There's an art center there in a building where artists live with a lower income, because we know that artists generally aren't really rich people. You like that, huh? And the second thing is, I put together a food policy council because I was concerned about food deserts in CD1. Here, this wealthy congressional district has food deserts scattered all over our congressional district. We have people who have no place to buy healthy food. So part of the mission of my food policy council and the work they're doing now is bringing healthy food where it was not available to people. Thank you.
Vivian. Elaine has shown me one of her cards. Is this directed towards anybody, Elaine?
No.
Okay, 30 seconds.
It's an additional comment because so many of us mentioned housing. People of color, neighborhoods of color have been systematically, institutionally discriminated against on Long Island, from Roslyn out to neighborhoods in the East End. I see people nodding their heads because they know that these communities received unfavorable lending conditions and all kind of other obstacles to starting their businesses, growing neighborhoods, buying homes. That's the history of Gordon Heights. And that had an impact in this district from its first inception.
Thank you. And you can keep that microphone for our last follow-up question. What ideas do you have that would improve the fiscal well-being of our district in a way that doesn't unfairly favor constituents based on issues of class, race, or gender?
So starting where I just left off, anything systematically discriminating against a class of people or any other group of people, there has to be accountability and transparency, and we have to be unwilling to allow local government to have those laws in place. So from the federal point of view, looking to that and saying that's not acceptable, and then also looking at the federal level and making certain that we have a Voting Rights Act and we have other non-discrimination laws in place. We can also make sure that we properly account for the work that people do in their homes. And this was mentioned already, when people are gigging, or if they are a homemaker, there are many instances where their work is considered not to be associated with benefits or even not associated with equal pay. So when we start to work on equal pay, on family leave time, on Medicare for all, we're doing something that benefits everybody and doesn't pay attention to what economic position they currently have.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this part of the district on this side of the canal specifically. We have real problems of income inequality that people are becoming much more aware of these days, thanks to the president and his immigration policy. We have a real need for workers here at every level, whether that be teachers, firemen, or seasonal workers. And it's very hard for them to come into the area, and they can't afford the real estate here, which creates a need for housing and to do something about the housing situation. And we come up against the NIMBYism as we try to do something about housing. We can fix that partially with money, but we need to take other steps to encourage better housing options here on this side of the canal. And it's a balance, because we also need to look out for land use, and we don't want to destroy our open spaces. But we need to do something about housing. And government, federal government can certainly provide money for it. And then we need to do something about immigrants. And I don't have nearly enough time to talk about immigration at the end of this question. But it's a major issue that people should think about when talking about income inequality in CD1.
I'll tag on what Perry said, because we do have nonprofit organizations who are always working very hard, and I want to say thank you to Legislator Fleming when she was on the town board and now as a legislator, who's encouraging more affordable housing on this end of the island, because it is important, because many of those people who are coming out and working out here are going further west where it's more affordable. And that's not fair to them that they can't live where they work. They have every right to be able to live where they work. So there are nonprofit organizations who do affordable housing, and we need to encourage, again, with federal funding, to allow them to be able to do more of it. And again, with the support, again, our local government, our town government leaders need to have the political will and guts to do the right thing.
I'm going to be a member of Congress that works on two different levels. On the one level, I want to be part of a coalition in Congress that's working on the big picture issues, such as Medicare for all, such as reducing Pentagon spending, and that I would be a proud member of the Progressive Caucus within the Congress. At the same time, I want to be a member of Congress that works skillfully and diligently to deliver discrete things for the district. So housing is the area of public policy that I have most experience in, and I would begin by trying to figure out the housing programs that we could get that would address some of the issues that we've talked about lack of workforce housing, lack of housing for young families, lack of appropriate housing for seniors who want to downsize and stay in their communities. And this is the kind of work I've done quite a bit of. And the other area I would want to work on is transportation infrastructure, because the lack of a good public bus system is discriminatory. It discriminates against low-income people, it discriminates against the older people, people with disabilities. So those are two things I would like to get working on right away to address that and deliver tangible benefits for the district.
Thank you, David. We could pass that mic down.
Would you mind repeating the question?
Of course, yeah. So the question is, what ideas do you have that would improve the fiscal well-being of our district in a way that doesn't unfairly favor constituents based on issues of class, race, or gender?
Okay, no wonder I forgot it. There's a lot in it.
Okay. I'm going to go down the line because there were so many elements that I heard that are important to this question. The first one, Elaine mentioned Family Leave Act. And when we talk about a Family Leave Act, we're looking at a true economic stumbling block, particularly for young families and for single-parent families. And that's why when I was in the legislature, I supported daycare incentives and daycare vouchers. And that's something that has been cut as one of the safety net features in the by the federal government. People who are trying to get back to work, particularly single mothers, and they're the greatest proportion of poor families in Suffolk County are single moms. So they need help with childcare. They need help in order to get to work, which brings me to what David just said about transportation. When you are looking for a job and you have to take buses that require 3 hours to get to an appointment, it makes it a tremendous hardship to be able to not only work, but to look for a job. And so we have to improve our bus system. I had expanded routes several times in our bus system, but we need a lot more of that infrastructure improvement. And my time isn't up yet, good. We need to have a system in, that's it.
Would you like to challenge, David?
No, are we allowed to ask a question that anyone can answer, or does it have to be to a specific individual?
Well, you could challenge a specific individual by using your card, or you could use your card to make a general comment.
That they can respond to if they want
Absolutely.
to.
Would you like to use one?
Yeah, I'll use it.
Okay, and who is it directed towards?
No, it's
A general
a general comment, but I would love for them to respond.
Unfortunately, we
They,
can't
one
change
person
the
can
debate
jump in, or
right
one
now.
person can jump in, right? No?
They can use their card
Oh,
to
they have
challenge
to
what
use
you
their
say
card.
in this.
All right, it's tricky. It was a parliamentary procedure. Now, I'm going to go.
You've got to be more decisive than Caucus.
No, you need to know the rules of procedure, right? So that's those so the training, he or she who knows the rules. We're going to have to be masters at rules of procedure. It's part of what I've done in my work in training parliaments overseas. So my comment is that we do need to acknowledge your question about. We do need to acknowledge that not only is there economic inequality, but layered on top of that is racial discrimination. And so your question about being fair to everyone, I mean, I would reverse that. And in the fact that we know that there are communities that have been historically discriminated against. There's been a very interesting report put out called The State of Black Long Island, and that talks about discrimination.
That's actually supposed to be your card.
Oh, I never mind. So what I want to say is
Would
go
you
to
like
my
to use another card?
go to
for
my
another 30
website
seconds? Because
and
30 seconds is up, I'm sorry.
and
We could use another card, Joe, if you'd like.
all right, I will stop. I'll squeeze it in somehow else.
Okay, so we're going to move on, and Perry's going to start this next group of questions. Okay, the majority of Americans believe that we must come to a consensus around increased gun safety measures. Which proposals do you think we have the best opportunity at passing? And what, in your opinion, are the strongest aspects of New York state law that perhaps could be adopted on a national level? This is a standalone question, and you'll have 2 minutes to answer.
Thanks, Elaine. It's a great question because gun safety is probably one of Lee Zeldin's biggest vulnerabilities. So in terms of what we should do, we should be focusing on gun safety laws going forward that will renew the old assault weapons ban that expired in 2004, and that will require background checks without loopholes, which is not what we have in the current system. And most of all, we should stop and undo what's passed in the House, and fortunately has not passed in the Senate, which is concealed carry reciprocity, which is Lee Zeldin's pet issue. All of these things are part of the New York SAFE Act. And the New York SAFE Act, for people's reference, is something we passed in the aftermath of Sandy Hook. The SAFE Act is a great example for what can happen in America. And we should have basically a national SAFE Act. In terms of could we pass it in Congress, it's a function of two things. Number one, what kind of a majority do we have? If we get enough people elected, enough Democrats elected so that we don't just take back the House and get a majority in the Senate, but can override Trump's veto, that'll go a long way. Otherwise, we pass legislation and then we wait, and it becomes an issue in 2020 when the next presidential election is happening. But one way or another, we need to fight back against the NRA influence, and Parkland really set this up. It's an important issue for Democrats going forward to unite around the gun safety issue and use it against Zeldin. Because as I said, I think it's Zeldin's biggest vulnerability.
Thank you. Kate?
Okay, the governor just approved a bill to prevent domestic abusers from access to guns. That's a good start, and we should do that on the federal level. Felons should not have access to guns. CDC and the ATF, let's not tie their hands anymore. Let's fund the CDC so they can do their research on gun violence. National background checks, absolutely. Military-style assault weapons should be banned, period. I keep saying it, and I'll say it again. I'm married to a New York City police officer. This concealed carry reciprocity puts us in danger, and it puts our law enforcement in danger. And even though law enforcement said that they did not want to see this approved, Lee Zeldin still supported it. So he doesn't care one iota about us or about our law enforcement. Another thing that we need to make sure is that, these military assault weapons, these are weapons that belong in our military and they belong in our law enforcement. They should not be on the streets. So let's make sure. I think that that's something. I think the governor has been on the right path with the SAFE Act, and certainly, and like Perry said, we need to make sure we have a majority so that we can pass these bills, and if they are vetoed, to make sure that we have the majority to be able to override the vetoes.
Thank you. David, 2 minutes.
The majority of Americans are for sensible gun laws, for banning semi-automatic weapons, for background checks. So the question that we all know is, why haven't we passed this legislation? Why, after massacre? And yes, I mean, taking back the House and the Senate, we can say arguably that's the solution, but we know there are Democrats and then there are Democrats. And not all Democrats are good on this issue. So it's going to also take a hard look at what the Democratic Party really stands for, and what the leadership of the Democratic Party is are they going to, how tough they're going to be? Are they going to mount primary challenges against those Democrats that are bad on this and other issues? And at the heart of this issue, there's two things. One, there's a level of violence in our society which is unacceptable. We live with a high level of violence. And yes, we should pass legislation to reduce that. Fewer guns means less violence. I think I got the grammar right. Fewer guns means less violence. So we know that. Yes, we should take steps to that. But then there's also a cultural issue that we have to start very young, and particularly with boys, teaching boys that guns are not cool. Guns are not good. Right? I was armed to the teeth with toy guns as a kid, and I don't think that's healthy. Actually, I think it's part. I mean, I didn't end up being a violent person, but I don't think it's healthy. We need to be honest about that. But if the other thing, so it's a cultural issue, and then there's the fact that our government has been taken over by lobbyists on many fields. Now, why can't we get sensible health care reform, universal health care? Why can't we have a moral foreign policy? Why can't we pass gun legislation? It's because of the influence of lobbyists. And if we don't pass really comprehensive campaign finance reform, we're not going to have a government that really stands up for what most Americans believe in.
Thank you. Pass it to Vivian.
Thank you. It didn't turn out too badly, David. Okay, so much of what I believe in has already been, we certainly are of one mind, I think, on this particular issue. The day after my first election, the day after I won my first election, I got a call when I was in my class, and the call was from Carolyn McCarthy to congratulate me. She knew my name because I had attended so many of her rallies. Carolyn McCarthy, former congresswoman, her husband had been killed on the Long Island Railroad by gunshot, and her son severely wounded. So that was 1999. And how disgraceful is it to say that we have gone backwards since that time? We have rolled back legislation that we had, protections that we had as a society. And it's exactly what David just said. It's the money that the NRA is pouring into the pockets of our supposed representatives. And Lee Zeldin being the top recipient of NRA money in New York State. So I support the safeguards, the SAFE Act of New York, where we have closed the loopholes, where we have an extensive background check. But we can't close our borders to guns coming from other states. And that brings me to Zeldin, the biggest proponent of the reciprocity of concealed carry. I was visiting my daughter in Dallas. We were going to the aquarium, and there was a gentleman in front of us with his two little girls. And when he got to the counter, he had to show his license. And I said to my daughter, "Oh, I have to look for my driver's license." And she said, "No, you don't. You're not carrying." Chilling, isn't it? That's what concealed carry is. Civilians walking around carrying their guns wherever they go, including with their children at a public event.
And that's time, Vivian.
We need a majority in Congress.
I'm glad the question asked us specifically, what are the most likely controls that we can pass, and what are the biggest successes in New York? Per polls and information from state legislatures, background checks are likely to pass. An assault weapons ban is likely to have support again right now. A nationwide database of licensed gun users is something that we should approach, and something that takes guns more completely out of the hands of abusers and people with mental health, certified mental health corrections, that is going to find traction. And New York has done a couple of those things. New York made it illegal to have assault weapons. New York has pretty strong controls on where you can have and where you can carry long guns versus short guns. And as has been mentioned, New York makes sure that a domestic abuser will not have either a long gun or a short gun. I'll mention that these protections have to be watched and sometimes litigated. Massachusetts has an assault weapons ban as well. I saw a presentation by the Massachusetts Attorney General, but these guns that were not legal there were on sale there, and when they investigated, they were being marketed as Massachusetts compliant AR-15s. There was no such thing, but they had to go after it. The state had to go after it, and I suspect that we will have to go after it as well. So having told you what I think are the most likely things to pass, I didn't mention research because we always mention CDC research. The least likely thing to pass that will help is to reverse Citizens United.
Thank you all. Okay, we'll start the next set of questions with Kate. Oh, Perry, sure, go ahead. 30 seconds.
And let me just make one follow-up. Right now, Democrats own the guns issue. We need to make sure that the issue is focused around gun safety and the limited issues that we're able to pass. And Zeldin's support of CCR. We can't be the party against the Second Amendment. If we get framed that way, and if we get framed as the anti-gun party, we're going to lose the election to Zeldin and not be able to accomplish what we want. So we need to be careful, but we need to be active.
And that's time. Thank you. Okay, Kate. And Perry, this is an issue you wanted to talk about, so here we go. Given the controversy over immigration during the Trump administration, how would you frame the discussion over the fate of immigrants and the impact of immigration policy on our economy? It's our main question. You'll have 2 minutes.
Well, I can start with, I am an immigrant. And this immigration policy that has been debated for quite some time, we need a clean DACA. We need to make sure that the young people who came here from Central America, who want to stay here, they came here as babies, we need to make sure that they have a pathway to citizenship. And as far as what's going on today, we are hearing about ICE going into people's homes and taking people out of their homes who have done nothing more than being undocumented. And that's a disgrace, because we do have a law, and they are protected under the Constitution. And I'll tell you why I feel so much about this one, is I grew up in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. For 9 years I grew up in a war zone. We were considered second-class citizens in our own country. The British Army would come into our homes and take your family member out. There was no warrants. There was no reason why other than they suspected you. And I've seen that, and it happened in my home. This is America, and we have a constitution, and we need to make sure that what I experienced in my homeland does not happen here to the immigrant families here. And I know that there's some discussion about administrative warrants and judicial warrants. Absolutely. They have to have, when it comes to these types of situations, they should have a judicial warrant. And that the issue that's going on at the jail separately, the sheriff I've met with him, we've sat with him, and he showed us what he's doing in the jail and the issue with the administrative warrants. One of the issues being is that many of the people that he is holding right now have been convicted previously and are under serious charges. So he is challenged with the task of our public safety.
And that's time.
And
Thank you.
okay, thank you.
David.
Trump's immigration policy is based on racism, first and foremost. That's what it's. So racist policies that are intended to win votes. And so it's utterly unscrupulous and unprincipled. My wife's family are immigrants from East Africa and Uganda. My father-in-law was a poor Muslim boy who grew up with no shoes, came here, built a great career, has a pediatric nephrologist. My wife is a doctor. I think we, as everyone in this room, are incredibly offended by the racism of Trump's policy. We need to talk about immigration not as a problem, Immigration is a strength. Open societies are successful societies, they're dynamic societies. It's a net benefit in terms of the economy. We know that. Immigrants contribute tremendously to our economy. They're vital for many sectors of our economy, including the agricultural economy here on Long Island. So we need to be really forthright and staunch in defending our immigrant communities. And we do need a comprehensive path, immigration reform. So to legalize, a path of legalization for undocumented, so they can fully participate in our civic life.
Thank you. As we pass the mic back, I'm just going to reread the question, which is, how would you frame the discussion over the fate of immigrants and the impact of immigration policy on our economy?
I'm going to continue Dave's framing of it being a racially motivated policy. We saw it right here in Suffolk County when there was fear-mongering and race-baiting by a county executive. And I'm the only person standing here before you who had the ability to vote against Steve Levy's immigration policy, and I did vote no. When I did, I was called a spick, my life was threatened, and a truck parked in front of our home for 6 hours with signs saying, "Deport Fisher." When I referred to people as immigrants, people from the audience would yell back, "They're not immigrants, they're aliens." And so I brought my old Webster's dictionary and read the definition of immigrant for them. And so where do we go from here? We make sure that we stand fast against the horrible racism against brown and black people that exists in our country. As Democrats, that is our call to duty. Immigrants have always been the entrepreneurs in this country. The people who started the small businesses, your delis, your bodegas, your small businesses throughout towns. Immigrants are a boon to the economy. When we can get immigrants out of the shadows and into the life stream of our economy and our communities, they will be an even greater boon. I take this very personally. I feel it very deeply because I saw the ugliness that ended here in Suffolk County with the slaughter of a young man who was going home from work, Marcelo Lucero. I met his mother. And it shamed me to know that this happened to her son in our county while I was sitting at the legislature. And so I gave her a pair of rosary beads that I had received when I was 15 years old.
I'm sorry, Vivian. But
from
we
a
have
girl
to
who was
stop
an
there.
immigrant at that time.
Thank you. Elaine.
Lee Zeldin, besides being awful, is embarrassing on this. He came to Brookhaven National Laboratory for a VIP moment, and he said, "I believe in American exceptionalism," to a room full of 300 Russian and German and Japanese accelerator physicists. You don't know what you're doing. The problem with framing immigration racially is that a healthy immigration system also has, I'll say diversity because it's not necessarily racial, but one of the 4 pillars of our immigration system is to make sure that we do bring in diversity, that immigrants are coming from different countries by numbers that we control to ensure that it's diverse. So I prefer to frame the issue of immigration in terms of whether we are all following the laws, whether the laws apply to everybody. When somebody has come into the country without documentation, they don't have the same rights because they don't have the rights of a citizen. They don't have the same rights to have legal representation if they're detained. And if we don't want that situation, we want to decrease the number of people who are undocumented. We want to get it so that everyone's documented and everyone can be part of our social safety net and our social services because they are already part of our tax base. So what to do about that is to ensure that the laws are laws that we can follow. The immigration law that is a 3-year or a 10-year ban on somebody who has overstayed their visa, leaves the country with it expired, and then can't return, they're not able to keep their family together. I see a more forgiving path to restarting their visa program is needed for them. For people who have crossed over into the country unlawfully to begin with, our colleagues are going to expect that we hold some accountability there, but it's up to us to enforce human rights.
Perry.
I'll try not to repeat too much of what's been said already, but it's priority number one. We need comprehensive immigration reform in this country, and we've known we've needed it at least since the beginning of this century. The Gang of Eight tried to pass on a bipartisan basis comprehensive immigration reform, and it actually got through the Senate, and the House refused to pass it. And we have just a need that won't go away, and out of that, Obama came forward with the DACA solution. It was not a law passed by the legislature, but at least it was a solution that was workable and bought us some time. And we have TPS, temporary status, for people from challenged areas like Honduras. And Trump is now trying to undo all the progress we made. What he did with DACA, obviously bad, we all know that. But actually with TPS, it's going to become a bigger problem. People from Honduras are going to be hitting the TPS deadline and being, theoretically at least, deported. Massive numbers of people, and we can't do that. So we need to do something, we need to move forward, and we need comprehensive immigration reform. Trump uses this issue to rile his base. His recent tweets about the so-called caravan of people that were coming through the Mexican border into America culminated last weekend with pictures of Americans climbing fences, or not Americans, immigrants or potential immigrants seeking asylum, climbing fences. The thought of that is America is just awful. And these are people seeking asylum. We have asylum laws in this country that Trump is just ignoring. And what I left out here, and hopefully in follow-up I'll get to mention, it's the economic effect. We need workers here in CD1. It's a big issue in CD1, it farms, and immigration policy is going to have a big effect.
Thank you, Perry. Before we move on to the follow-up, Vivian would like to use her second card. She'll have 30 seconds. Is it directed towards anyone, Vivian?
And thank you, Perry, for providing that segue, because I was going to speak about the need of temporary workers' visas for farmers. You know, Suffolk County has the highest, as far as dollars, agricultural revenue in the state. And our farmers are hungry for workers. And there was a time when they had sufficient temporary visas so people could come work on the farms during the season, go home and return. They can't do that now. And so it's hurting our farmers.
Thank you. David would like to use his second card.
Kate, you raised the issue of ICE detainers, and you really need to clarify your position. I've talked to immigration lawyers. The criminal status of the detainees is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Regardless, holding people without a judicial warrant is unconstitutional and racist. And so it's simply fear-mongering. It's falling into the fear-mongering. It doesn't matter what crime they committed. ICE has no jurisdiction over criminal matters. ICE has jurisdiction over civil matters. So you need to clarify your position on this issue.
Okay, that's your time. And now, Kate, you do not have to use a card. You have 30 seconds.
Okay. Like I said, I was on the Public Safety Committee along with Legislator Fleming. These issues came up, and at this point in time, we have a sheriff who says he's challenged with keeping our community safe. I saw the list of charges. I saw the list of convictions. They were rapists.
They're irrelevant.
They were severe felons.
It's irrelevant.
They were people who have committed serious crimes in our communities, and that is his concern. And this is where the county has to make that decision where they want to go. Is your public safety or allowing these people on the street?
That's time.
Do you have another question?
Thank you both. We're going to move on to the second question in this series, and we're going to start with you, Kate. You are all on the record in favor of creating a path towards citizenship for nonviolent, undocumented individuals. How would you work towards that goal while simultaneously quelling fears and anxiety amongst constituents while you do it? A minute and a half.
Okay. working on a path. Well, obviously, we need to clean DACA. I can give you a simple example. I had a gentleman came to my office one time. He was undocumented, was hurt doing some work in someone's home, fell off a ladder. They would not pay for his hospital bills. So he came into my office and he said, I don't know what to do. And he kept saying to me, look, I pay taxes. And I said, that doesn't matter. So there's a lot of our undocumented who do have federal ID numbers and they are paying taxes. So that I think is something that we should be looking at, is to make sure that if they can prove that they have come here, they're working, they're not committing serious crimes, that they should have an opportunity to work towards a path of becoming a legal citizen and eventually to become a citizen. Because I know that when you come here as an immigrant, you're coming here for a better life. Because the life that many of them live, when they're in El Salvador or they're in Nicaragua, and my husband has been there, he saw what they live like, and he agreed also with me. He says, you cannot allow people to go back to that country if this is the country they know and they are surviving and they're succeeding and they're now raising their children here. So we need to work to make sure that they are able to stay. And can I go ahead and use my card on response?
Actually, you have to wait. Well, everybody will answer and then we'll
Okay,
go back to you.
sure.
Okay. David.
We do need comprehensive immigration reform, and I said we need a path to citizenship for the undocumented. So that's a big, difficult project that's failed before, so it's not going to be easy. There are the discrete pieces, so a clean DACA act for the dreamers that would allow them to stay. I think we all support that. I think we're against removing temporary protected status for a bunch of national groups, including El Salvador, Honduras, and Haiti. But we really are going to have to fight back against the fear-mongering and the argument that immigrants are committing crimes, that this is what the Republicans use. And we're going to have to stand strong on that issue. The evidence is that immigrants don't commit crimes at a higher rate than citizens. But evidence doesn't always carry the day, as we know. So we're going to have to make that argument that this is racism, this is and we should not be falling into that fear-mongering, and we're going to have to stand up against that.
Thank you, David. Question is, how would you work towards that goal while simultaneously quelling fears and anxiety amongst constituents? Vivian.
In my first year as a legislator, Legislator Caracappa came to the legislature with a binder, which he said was filled with crimes that were being committed by illegal aliens. And everybody bought it. He presented it to the legislature. It was public. It was on the record. Well, I asked him for that binder, and I went to headquarters with it. We went through every single page. There was one crime committed. The rest of them were complaints about loitering and such minor complaints. The one person who had committed a crime had stolen a pair of boots at Kmart. This is what goes out unless you look very closely. I recently went to Infant Jesus Church in Port Jefferson, where I had been volunteering as an ESL teacher, and I taught primarily immigrants who were not documented. And as I walked in, the woman at the parish outreach said, I was just praying that I would see you, and you walked in the door. She wanted me to write a letter for a man that I had been seeing at that church for a long time, that she knew him as a great family man. And I wrote a letter. He is being held in Batavia. The man has never committed a crime. He was picked up by ICE and taken away and has a family with young children. This is what's happening. This is the fear. So we must have a road to citizenship. We must make sure that we hold on to DACA. We must make sure that we treat people fairly. That's what we are as Democrats.
It's absolutely the case that when the executive branch of the government is acting like thugs on this issue, that we have to ask for more than what we demanded before in terms of allowing undocumented immigrants to have a path to citizenship. But it is also fair to ask our Congress for an overhaul of the process where documented immigrants are on their path to citizenship or renewing their visas, or if they want to be temporary workers, And we should bring that up into the 21st century as well. I talked about a digital system to submit problems and hotspot mapping for the consumer protections. And we don't want at the federal level complaints against immigrants or against anything else to be in a paper binder, right? We want to see where the hotspots are. Where are people being delayed in their paperwork? Where are they paying the same fee 4 times and getting set back 8 years in their process? Is it coming out of one state? Is it coming out of one set of immigrants? Is it coming out of one office? So let's find that problem. And then we have a little bit of ammunition in arguing with some of the other side's constituents. Who they'll say, it's not fair to let people skip the line. Let's make sure that the data are shown transparently so that there is no line, no backlog, no clog, and that we can get the problem solved.
So the question was, what would I do as congressman for immigration to advance the issue, and also how would I make people comfortable with it, people on the other side, the Zeldin crowd? And I think I answered the first part of the question already, so I'm going to focus on how do you make people comfortable. And Lee Zeldin is as guilty as Donald Trump of stroking people's xenophobia. What he did at the State of the Union with bringing Brentwood victims just to sit next to him, to try to make an example against immigration, is just, it's disgusting. It's bringing out the worst in people. And we need to show example the other way. And Luis, and I'm sorry I don't know his last name, was just seized from East Hampton and it's being held. And he was a DACA person. And what he's being held for is a past DWI. And that does not make him a bad person. So we need to use that kind of example to sell our immigration program. And finally, we need to bring immigrants out of the shadows and make a bigger deal of how important that is. Because if immigrants are part of the system, they cooperate with law enforcement. They're not targets for MS-13. And that is the way we move forward on immigration and get it bipartisan, get both parties to buy into it. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Kate, I know you wanted to use one of your cards.
No, it's okay.
No, you're okay?
Just keep going.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well, we have the last question in this series, and actually you'll have a chance to expand on something you talked about before. What's your view on ICE working with local authorities using administrative warrants for detaining immigrants?
You saved your card.
Good. So as far as ICE is concerned, clearly we're hearing a lot of the issues with what they're doing that's unfair to our undocumented immigrants. The law enforcement to act as ICE agents or to be a second party to ICE, I do not agree with them doing it. I can tell you our law enforcement have enough work to do just doing regular public safety issues than having to start now working as immigration. That is not their job. That's not what they should be doing. As far as the warrants are concerned, when it comes to the, if they are going to go to a community, they absolutely should have a judicial warrant. When we talked about what was going on in the jail, and I can tell you one of the issues that was very disturbing to me, Jorge Tigre lived in my district. They were an immigrant family, and they were targeted. Jorge was murdered by MS-13. So we need to make sure that we differentiate the difference between the undocumented immigrant who is here trying to struggle, making a living, taking care of their family, and the one who comes here to murder and maim. And yes, Trump has used this to justify his attack on immigrants. But we, as Democrats, need to make sure that we separate the two issues and that we protect the immigrants who want to work hard and come here. And again, preferably, it should be a judicial warrant if they're going to use warrants.
Thank you.
Not preferably, absolutely it has to be a judicial warrant. And so, I mean, I agree with what much as Kay has said, but the measure of a good society is the rule of law. It's an equal justice under the law. It's a pillar of our democracy. It's a pillar of our democracy. So I'll repeat what I said. The criminal status of people being detained in the jails that ICE is seeking to have them held doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how bad the crime they committed is. It's irrelevant because ICE does not have jurisdiction. So if we stand up and we have this litany of they're dangerous criminals or bad people, then we're falling into the exact thing that we should be opposing, which is the fear-mongering and the racism. And we just have to be very clear and very firm on this issue. And I frankly think that ICE is out of control. I think that they should be defunded, and we should start over in terms of them. They're a rogue agency. They didn't exist. It's not like ICE has existed since the beginning of time. They were created after 9/11, and they need serious reform. And if it takes defunding them, that's what we should do.
This will be short. We need to have judicial warrants. That's absolutely the case. Not we prefer, there must be judicial warrants. If someone is that hardened a criminal and at a level of being a felon and a true danger to the community, then get a judicial warrant. You can get a judge and get the judicial warrant. We cannot play fast and loose with our Constitution, with our human rights, with our civil rights. We cannot play fast and loose. Remember, first they went after the immigrant. Who will be next? We cannot play fast and loose with our Constitution.
Judicial warrants. I spent Wednesday evening at Suffolk County Police 3rd Precinct. I needed to use the restroom, and my staffer told me, there's no toilet paper. Oh, okay, and there's no lights. I can only imagine if you didn't have a cell phone and you were there for a reason other than to hear from immigrant community and the Latino community who were there to talk about, one woman was there to talk about her son who was given a concussion when she was pulled over by some off-duty personnel, not in a marked car, and another person talking about the profiling where he's regularly pulled over. So, along with insisting on judicial warrants, I'm also going to require, it's time not to do certain things in unmarked cars anymore. These people do not know when somebody is following them home from a late shift after hard work. They do not know whether it is ICE, an unmarked police car, or somebody from a violent gang, or somebody else. We have to have the right to drive away and not open the door unless somebody is showing a badge and approached us in a marked car. Maybe in the good old days, there was more trust and there were more reasons and police could be authorized to do more things from unmarked cars. But let's make a change right now because we've let that swing way too far. And this is a simple, doesn't cost very much, is not ideological fix. If you have a job to do, you can do it in a marked car.
Thank you, Elaine. Carrie?
So, 2 points. Where did administrative warrants come from? It used to be that ICE claimed that they could deport people or have people held for their deportation based on something called detainer. With detainer, you didn't even need to show probable cause. The courts said that's not acceptable. We have a rule of law in this country. You need to get a warrant. And out of that, they came up with the administrative warrant, which says ICE can create a warrant and ICE says there's probable cause, and you don't need to go to a judge. Again, as many people said, that's breaking the rule of law in this country. We can't have that. If you have probable cause, go get a real warrant with a judge. Everyone else does that in America. Why don't potential deportees have the same rights? We're all on American soil, and we have a constitution that guarantees people those rights. In terms of what Elaine said about unmarked cars, that's a great point. And we were both at a presentation at OLA about a week ago, and we heard about what Suffolk County is doing, or what's happening in Suffolk County with ICE. The real problem is that ICE is freelancing. They're not working with the local law enforcement. That's what really needs to stop. If ICE has a mission, they should do it with local law enforcement. Why not cooperate? They're not a deportation force in America. We're not at that level yet, Donald Trump notwithstanding. Thanks.
Thank you, Perry. Okay, we're going to move on to question number 5. And David, this is your turn to start. Racial injustice is built into our society. How does that manifest itself in our district specifically, and how should government address it?
So, yeah, this I guess I used a card trying to address this, right? Across the board, the history of racial injustice has impacted our society in all kinds of ways, in terms of residential segregation, in terms of wealth gap between white and non-white people, which is huge, and like I said, there's a great project called the State of Black Long Island, which documents this in very concrete numerical terms. It's sponsored by the Urban League. I really encourage you to go and look at that report, because it'll tell you much more than I could possibly tell you in a minute and a half. But what I will say is that, so then public policy does need to be responsive to that history. And so when we implement policies, whether they're job training or even something as simple as summer youth employment programs, we need to look at who has access to those programs, and are they working in a way that acknowledges that history of racial injustice, and is it moving us in the right direction in having a more just and equitable society?
Thank you. Vivian, is next.
And this has been part of my work. I've worked on dozens of grant programs, and when we did that, that was something we looked at. When we saw money coming from the federal government, what is its impact across on different ethnic groups, on different demographic groups?
Thank you.
Well, you've heard. David, you always turn it off.
I'm sorry. I like what you have to say, and I apologize. It's not every time. I want to prevent whispering among the...
Okay. You've all heard this, that we live in one of the most segregated areas in the country. It's not something that came out of the South, that's just in the South. We are very guilty of it here. And I recently read about a case against the Mastic Beach Civic Association, where African American families were systematically being pushed out of their rentals. Evictions were happening regularly and without much notice. How much is this happening where people don't file suit because they don't have the wherewithal, or they don't know that they can? This is existing here. When I was looking for a house right after my divorce, and I had young children, a realtor knew that I didn't have a lot of money, and she said, I'm going to show you a nice neighborhood, but it's the right kind of people, or something, something to that effect. And I knew what the code was. She didn't know I was Latina, and she figured I wasn't black either, but she was giving me the code. So this is a suburb that was built on redlining and was built on segregation. It continues in our school system. When I've been to national education conferences, and when I tell people that we have 62 school districts in one county, the size of our county, they're amazed. And that's just a way of creating silos that separate the rich and the poor, the black, the brown, and the white. And so we have to look at our school system, and we certainly have to look at our housing segregation in Suffolk County. Oh, I did what David did.
So David and I were both at the meeting of State of Black Long Island that was in Riverhead a little while ago. And to my ear, most of the testimony from the panel up front at that meeting that informed the report referred to systematic town level biases, unfair lending procedures, towns not giving permits to people of color to start neighborhood centers, using really unguarded, lower frequency than a dog whistle language, telling people, if you build that center, those kind of people will be here. And just, it was very blatant, the things that we heard there. And likewise, at the meeting at the police precinct, we heard a lot about, there was a woman there who advocates for tenants, and they have compounded problems. If you are an undocumented tenant and your landlord is illegally renting his space to you, then you have a complaint. He gets sick of the complaints, he turns off the power or turns off the heat in the middle of winter. You don't speak English well, you can't make a call, and then you try to make a call, but people are still afraid the landlord won't do anything. So we really have a problem with allowing deviation from procedures and policies and fair policies and deviations from the law to compound each other. So we need accountability at the local level, and we need to have transparency, and for gosh sakes, we need to elect people at the local level and on up who are just going to stand their ground and not give in and say what they see when these unfair rulings are made.
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So the question is, racial injustice is built into our society. How does that manifest itself in our district? And then how should government address it?
Okay, so a lot of the responses so far are spot on, and I'm not going to try to repeat what other people have said, but I'd like to focus on how we can fix it and how we move forward and what government can do. The first thing I do want to point out is we have come a long way. If you look at the last election, we elected an African American as the sheriff of Suffolk County. If people were making bets on whether that would happen a year ago, I speculate very few people in this room thought that was going to be the reality today. So we are moving forward, and it probably couldn't have happened 5 years ago. We need to take further steps. We need to do things like improving the public transportation in this district. Public transportation is horrendous. The bus routes, they run very limited routes, and they run very limited hours. And they discriminate that way against neighborhoods where people of color tend to live. That's a real problem. Not allowing immigrants to have driver's license is another problem, because it basically condemns people to a substandard life without a car in Suffolk County. So we need to take steps to allow driver's licenses for everybody. That will go a long way towards helping with inequality. And last thing to mention are schools. Schools have to be the equalizer in America, not the unequalizer. If you look at Suffolk County schools and CD1 and the rest of the county, they are uneven today. And the government has an obligation to get involved and try to make education equal from district to district. Thank you.
Okay. So I can speak to the, again, schools. I represented some school districts, one school district that has more minority children in the district than normal, and we see what Trump was trying to do is pull after school programs. And we need to make sure that, the kids who are in the lower income communities, who are in minority communities, to make sure that our school districts are continuing to fund the breakfast programs, the free lunches, and the after-school programs. Because how do these children succeed is in our schools and making sure that they have everything they need. And there was an incident that was brought up about the Mastic Beach property owners. It's incorrect. It was not the Mastic Beach property owners. It was the Mastic Beach Village Code Enforcement Officer who was targeting one specific family. And it turns out the landlord said that they were not paying the rent and had not paid the rent for months, and who was evicting them. I know what the reference is on this one. However, I contacted, when I had learned that we felt that this was a target on a specific family because of their color, I contacted Race Racism. I notified them. And in turn, after that, I spoke with the village mayor, and we set up meetings with the district attorney's office to have him handle that particular situation. However, the district attorney at the time was Tom Spoda. So I am hoping that our new district attorney will move forward with this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. We're going to move on to the follow-up to this question. And you'll forgive me, it's a bit of, again, another damage control question, if you will, but I think it's an important one to ask. How would you deal with backlash to any attempt to address remedies to racial injustice? You'll have a minute and a half.
I think it's important to make the case that having people be discriminated against, having people that people who at the bottom of the economic barrel that are struggling, this isn't something that this is damaging to our society as a whole, and we need to make that case that we need to build communities, we need to work together as communities to find common ground, to solve common problems, and that bringing up those who are suffering, whether they're black or white or Latino, is actually going to be something that benefits us as a whole. And I can cite a personal experience from my own life. My father lost his job in the fiscal crisis of the 70s. And this was because New York City was told that it was fiscally irresponsible, the federal government wouldn't help it out. Well, the fact was that New York City and other cities throughout the country had tried, without federal assistance, to address the social issues of black people fleeing racial discrimination and violence in the South and coming to the cities. So if there had been human investment from the federal government to address this historic injustice, we would have had, things would have been very different. The outcome would be very different. And my father and thousands of other white people who were laid off would have kept their jobs.
Thank you, David. Maybe keep the microphone on.
Oh, God. I'll get it right. Am I going to get a last chance? I need to demonstrate that I'm capable of learning. Right?
Repeat. We've seen in the past few years a movement throughout our country called Black Lives Matter. And it's been an action that has been developed because of a sense or occurrences in the public sphere where black people have experienced violence directed at them by police and have stood up against it. And the backlash to that has been for the police to feel that they are being attacked as police and their own safety is being compromised. And you see the police flags with the black line on them showing the support for the police. And we need to try, I feel as a public official, that it's incumbent upon us to try to bridge that, to try to bridge where these breakdowns occur, to develop more transparency in our law enforcement, to develop more community policing so that there's an understanding from one side to the other, because we know that there is. I'll stop, thank you.
Elaine.
How to address backlash. When we're talking to our colleagues in Congress, they don't have the right to any backlash. We have to enact what is lawful. Discrimination is not lawful. So they don't get a backlash card that they can play on us. For our constituents, okay, there are many ways to make sure our constituents are heard, but there's such a thing as right and wrong. Right after Trump's election, one of the first things I did was a Black Lives Matter march. It was already scheduled in Stony Brook. It was going to go on whether or not the election turned out that way. And I ran into a couple who I didn't expect to necessarily see, but it was a black woman I knew who was married to a white friend of mine. And I didn't actually know her very well because it was her husband who I did my activities with. But she, we kind of, you know, hugged and wiped our noses and stuff, and then we were getting in line for the march. And she said, I'm really worried about LGBTQ people. Because, you know, we'll survive, we always do, but I'm really worried for them. And to me, that was what humanity should be. And maybe that kind of story will help when we're working with individual people and they're showing signs of that backlash.
So, question is, how do we deal with backlash? And I think my answer is, we are already dealing with backlash right now. That's where this society is. We elected Barack Obama president, and we got a backlash in the last election. That's why this room has so many people in it, because Donald Trump is leading the backlash. Everything Trump does is about stroking people's inherent racism and bringing out the worst in people. And that's what we're running against. That is what we need to stop as Democrats. And you can look at some of the things Trump has done, specifically that focus on backlash, pardoning Joe Arpaio. It's an unbelievable thing. Who would have thought that would happen in America? We have a guy who discriminated, he got convicted of it, and then the President of the United States pardons him. Well, how do we fight back? We elect Democrats to the House, we elect Democrats to the Senate, and we vote Trump out of office as soon as we're able to. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
So how do we deal with backlash? There's a lot of backlash that we can deal with in many ways, and I can tell you, when I was a legislator, I spoke out against the Conservative Party leader, who was spent 1 year's probation for sexually assaulting a girl in college. He also stole our tax dollars, and I was the only one who was willing to speak out. And politically, I got some backlash, and I know that that's one of the reasons why I will not get the independence line, probably never, because of the fact that I have spoken out against this particular person. So I think the only way that we can speak out on this issue and deal with the backlash is you have to have the will and you have to have the guts as an elected official, even if it may not be politically the best thing for you to do, to speak out. Speak your mind, what's in your heart, and do what you believe in. And do what's right, what's morally right, and not what's politically right.
Thank you all. Okay, we're on to our final topic, unless anybody has any blue cards. Okay, final topic for this first debate, and the final topic is the 2018 elections. Vivian, we're back to you. Okay, this is kind of fun. So there's been much talk about a blue wave coming for the country in November. In your opinion, should Democrats, including the winner of this primary, make it a point to run against Trump, or rather focus on another set of priorities? In essence, what is the ideal winning message for Democrats moving forward? You'll have 2 minutes.
The winning message is to run against Zeldin, because Zeldin has tacked to the right from the time he became a congressman. He's way to the right on women's issues, and I'm in sharp contrast to that. I have always supported women. I have asked women to run for office, and we have 2 great women in office in Suffolk County because I asked them to run. I was a member of the board of Planned Parenthood, and thank you for running in front of the Planned Parenthood building, Perry. I was in it as a board member. And I'm running against a man, Lee Zeldin, who is way to the right as far as discriminating against people of different religions. I have always been a great supporter of diversity, of fairness, of equal rights. He is someone who has been, as Perry said earlier, supported the tax bill that is hurting us here on Long Island until they gave him a pass with SALT. And so I would run against him on the tax bill that's hurting us in our right in our pockets. He has been a an absolute rubber stamp for Donald Trump. And I have had a career of speaking truth to power. I spoke truth to power as a Suffolk County legislator when my party was gerrymandering a district, dissecting it right down its main street. And I actually went to federal court fighting for that district to be a majority minority district, and won. So when you know how to speak truth to power, and you're running against someone who is nothing but a puppet, then that's a clear road to victory. I have represented the people of this CD. I have lived here and been part of the community for 50 years.
Thank you.
So I'll be happy to run against Zeldin.
Thank you. Elaine.
I'm running with a message of what our future can look like, what we can build here, what you as a voter can be doing with your own two hands. Voters come out because they feel involved and inspired. Everyone in this room is here because you know that there's some good you can do in choosing the best candidate. We know that it's the voters who have the power to get Congress unstuck and who can give Congress the ability to vote for the things that we want Congress to vote for. And Lee Zeldin is somebody with no ideas for what the future should look like. If you ask him what our economy should be made of, he will go back to Ronald Reagan's 80s. If you ask him what women's rights should look like, he can only tell you what he felt was right from a time long ago. He's on record with all of these things. He's not knowledgeable, he doesn't have ideas, and all he can do is tell you who the enemy is. And when we listen to him talk, he is telling us, that's the enemy, that's the enemy, that's the enemy. My opponent is unsolved problems. And I think that voters will come out when they know that we can solve problems and move forward, much more so than if we talk to them about who the enemy is.
And there are a lot of answers to that question. I'm personally running for office because Donald Trump is president, and that's my call to action. And I think we need to step up and do something to take back America for us, for our social values, for our progressive values. That has got to be the Democratic message. We're not running against anything. We're running for the social values that brought America together. We're running for health care. We're running for the environment. We're running for pro-choice. We're running for education. We also have to be running for jobs and something that affects people's pocketbook. That is what motivates people to vote. And we need to win more than just a majority of progressives. We need to energize progressives and get them out voting, but we also need to bring other people to the polling place. And the Democratic message has got to be all-inclusive for everybody. We'll bring jobs back, and we'll improve the tax policy and take care of people. Lee Zeldin has certain vulnerabilities that we can exploit. One is guns, and we talked about that. By being for concealed carry reciprocity, Lee Zeldin wants to undo the SAFE Act, and we should make sure everybody realizes that about him. Zeldin is associated with the Republican tax cut, and that association should be his undoing. If we want to be fair and get rid of the discrimination against blue states, we need to vote Zeldin out of office, and we need a Democratic majority in the House. But the last thing is that Zeldin is directly tied to Donald Trump. He's his biggest apologist in the country. Zeldin is part of the Devin Nunes group trying to shut down the Mueller inquiry. That should not be allowed to happen. Zeldin is just so wrong on so many issues, and his connection to Donald Trump has got to be in forefront in people's mind at the voting booth. Thank you.
You know, our future and our children's future is being threatened right now by this current administration and the leadership that they have today. And that's something that we need to look at the elections that are coming up. Look at the energy in this room. Look how many people there are here today. Keep up this energy. We need to make sure that we support the elected officials that we currently have, our elected Democrats right now, not just this year, but also next year when they run for the Suffolk County Legislature. And when they run for our town offices, we need to make sure that we keep them in place. So we need to keep up the energy. We have a Me Too movement. We have the Parkland students. We need to continue to support what they are doing and keep the energy up and keep getting out there, and also encouraging those blanks to register Democrat. We know that many of those blanks do believe what Democrats believe in, so we need to get them to switch over so that they can be registered Democrats to vote for Democrats in primaries and in our general elections. So again, keep up the energy.
I'm running for Congress to do something, not to be someone. And this has been part of my life's work, to see that, I view this run as an extension of my life's work, to see that government is effective and truly working in the public interest. I've done it in New York, I've done it internationally. We need to take Zeldin on. He's the focus, show that he's wrong issue by issue. I have the breadth and depth of public policy experience, both domestically and in foreign policy, to challenge him issue by issue. He is linked to Donald Trump, but the focus has to be on him, and it also has to be on what Democrats stand for. That we truly are the party for economic fairness, that we truly are the party for the rule of law and equal justice under the law, that we're the party for respect for other people, respect for other nations, and respect for the environment. And if we're fearless in delivering that message, we'll beat Lee Zeldin. I will beat Lee Zeldin. And it's going to be in a way that sends shockwaves across the nation. Because we're not just trying to win one battle, we're trying to win a bigger struggle to have better politics and a better country.
We'll go back to
It's on.
So we have two cards. Vivian, you showed me your card first, so you'll have 30 seconds. And then Elaine, you showed me your card, and you'll go after Vivian.
30 seconds quick. I've spent many hours standing in front of Lee Zeldin's office. Let's visit Lee Zeldin, right? And he doesn't like to listen. And he wears his vet's uniform, right? He's vote for a vet. And yet Northport is falling apart. Has he been listening to the vets who live here, who rely on Northport, VA? When I was a legislator and emergency room doctors came to speak to me and told me, we're not getting trauma victims from the East End to Stony Brook Hospital quickly enough. I quickly researched it and found that if we put a hangar at Gabreski, we could have an airport for the East End.
I'm sorry,
That's
Vivian.
listening.
That's time. Thank you. Elaine.
The committed Democrats and progressives in this room are going to do the right thing. The voters we have to bring out do not sit at home reading progressive and political think pieces on their computers. We need to speak to them about what they will be doing with their own two hands. It's beneficial to have worked here as an adult, side by side with people in unions, people who've been techs who were resentful of the organized people they were working beside, and really know that if we can talk to them about what they're going to be doing, they'll vote.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Our last question of the afternoon before margaritas. Maybe I'm projecting. I think you're going to like it. So, we never want to lose, excuse me, if you were to win the primary in June, how would you counter the issues that Zeldin considers his strengths in the general election? And in addition, what do you perceive as Zeldin's Achilles heel? And Vivian, you're going to answer this first.
I believe I kind of just answered it because he's always doing that vote for a vet routine. And yet we see the VA hospital in Northport in complete disrepair. They've closed down the shelter for homeless vets. And it's clear that he is looking for privatization because they don't believe in government. Lee Zeldin, I went to visit him in Washington, and he's very good at his glib talking points. He sees that as his strength, that he speaks smoothly, he's got his talking points down. But if you've studied the issues, you can break his talking points down, and I believe I can do that. I believe I can look at, because I did it when I was in his office, and we were talking about the ACA and the repeal of the ACA, and he couldn't give me a response without really lying. So we're in an existential crisis here, and Lee Zeldin is part of it. He voted for a budget that was cutting the arts and sciences, research, curiosity, education. And then they took it one step farther by voting for the repeal of the ACA, which luckily wound up not passing. So if you have a civilization which has lost its need for arts and sciences and empathy, it's an existential crisis, and we will point that out.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. Elaine is next, but I will repeat the question. So if you were to win the primary in June, how would you counter the issues that Zeldin considers his strengths in the general election? And in addition, what do you perceive as Zeldin's Achilles heel?
Our former Congressman, Tim Bishop, has said that Zeldin was difficult to debate because Zeldin would say 5 things that were untrue during his 90 seconds, and Tim would be distracted trying to figure out which of them to counter. So to be knowledgeable and to pick one untruth and go after it is going to be a good skill to have. And so we'll have to bone up. All of us, I think, can do that. But the second thing that is wrong with Lee Zeldin is he is always telling you who the enemy is. If you are finding the enemy, you are not finding the unsolved problem. For everything that he says, here's the enemy, you can say, but here's the good and here's the unsolved problems. But here's the good and here's the unsolved problems. If we get our agenda onto the table like that, then we are controlling the conversation, and we're making his identification of an enemy useless because it doesn't go anywhere. I'm just not going to enter those frames.
So we have to speculate here a little bit, but what is Zeldin going to run on? I think he's going to run on MS-13 and try to blame Democrats for MS-13. I think he's going to run on his military record, which he's done before. I think he's going to run on the Second Amendment and try to own that issue and say the Democrats are out to take away your Second Amendment rights. I think he's going to run on his closeness to Donald Trump. So let's take those 4 things. MS-13, we need to own this issue ourselves and talk about how it relates to the immigration issues in this country and use Tim Sinney's talking points to our advantage. Tim Sinney ran against MS-13 very effectively in his race for DA. And his talking points will be very effective in running against Zeldin here. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and that is how we move forward. In terms of the military, Zeldin's a vet, no doubt about it. But what has he done for vets? And I think that's got to be the issue. And Vivian talked about the VA hospital, and privatization certainly is not the answer. In terms of the Second Amendment, we're not running against the Second Amendment. We're running against Parkland. And the clearer we are on that issue, and he is against the SAFE Act, that's how we own it. And finally on Trump, Zeldin's going to appeal to a certain number of people on using Donald Trump as his appeal. But we need to count on getting more voters out and to get Republicans who don't like Trump to vote too. There are plenty of them. And the more Zeldin uses Trump for his turnout, the more we need to turn it against him. Thank you.
So we need to talk about his absence in the district. He's been spending more time on MSNBC and Fox News than he is representing the people he was voted to represent. And that's what we're going to get him on. We can talk about his voting record on labor issues. He has voted so many bills that affect the health and safety of workers, gotten OSHA, his NLRB position, his support of Gorsuch. We have a Janus decision coming up, which is going to affect our public employees. So there's many things we can use. Let's see what June brings. Yeah, he's going to talk about vote for the vet. Well, guess what? I'm the wife of a 28-year veteran. My husband says to me the hardest part about being in the Army is being an Army wife. And having 2 sons in the military, go ahead, use it against me. I'm a Blue Star mom, I'm a veteran wife, and my husband's a New York City detective. And I can talk about the gun issue because I am married to a law enforcement officer that Lee Zeldin has voted to put my husband in danger, and I'm going to make sure he knows that.
I'm for working people and for a fair economy, and I'm not going to be labeled as being too progressive. I think that because I think those issues of a fair economy and all the things we've talked about here today are things that people can relate to across the political spectrum. And the Republicans try to use labels to claim a mantle that they don't deserve. I think Long Islanders know a scam. I think that when they see one, right, and they know that Lee Zeldin is not delivering for this district, and that I am going to deliver for this district on basic programs that we need, such as housing and transportation and clean water infrastructure. But I'm also going to challenge him on the big picture. I look forward to the foreign policy debate coming up because I'm the one that actually has foreign policy experience. He fancies himself a foreign policy expert. He's wrong. He's wrong. If he wants to stand up for veterans and for servicemen and women, he should not be beating the drum to go to war with Iran. It's extremely dangerous. The country can't afford it. It's immoral. I put myself at considerable risk to go work in Somalia and other places to try to build stable governments in those countries. This is the right approach. I am not going to have him lecture me about national security. I am not going to back down against his fear-mongering here in Long Island about MS-13 and his fear-mongering about other countries. It's not how we're going to keep us safe. It's not how we're going to build a strong country and a fairer country.
Craig, you'll have 30 seconds.
It's off. I backslid.
He's backsliding.
1 for 20.
I just want to point one thing out. Zeldin will twist facts. That's what he does. Zeldin's out yesterday tweeting about the unemployment rate and how low it is nationally. Zeldin's representing Suffolk County. Has anyone looked at Suffolk County unemployment? We're high. Our unemployment rate is not good, which is not to mention where wages are here. So Zeldin twists things, and that's where we have to call him out. Thanks.
You can pass that right to Kate.
Yeah. So I guess I can add, since I never used my cards. Again, another issue, environment and lack of infrastructure funding. This was a promise that was made by this administration in the first year there'll be infrastructure funding. We got nothing. We're still waiting for it. And I can tell you that the sewer district that I worked on and was able to get $189 million for, Lee Zeldin was not helpful in that one. He's been absent throughout that entire process. So we're going to be able to hammer on his environmental record and lack of infrastructure support.
And with that, I would like to thank each of you for coming today and participating in our debate.